She ordered me to finish the repairs fast, then asked softly, "Why do you treat me like this?" Riley sat in front of the control panel, his fingers moving quickly over the keys. The hum of the station's systems echoed through the room, a constant reminder of the mission at hand. The walls around him were cold and metallic, a stark contrast to the warmth of the planet below. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his thoughts focused on the task ahead. There was no time to waste. The planet was dying and the station needed repairs, fast. Commander Alara stood behind him, her presence heavy in the room. Riley could feel her gaze on his back, unwavering as she watched him work. He didn't need to look up to know she was there. Her presence was always felt, as commanding and powerful as ever. She had always been a tough leader, unyielding and determined. But today, there was something different in the air. Riley couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it wasn't the usual cold professionalism he was used to. It was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Ilara," he spoke her name aloud, not really expecting a response, just needing to say something. "Finish the repairs, Riley," she replied, her voice steady but carrying an edge of urgency. "We don't have much time. The planet's core is destabilizing faster than we anticipated. I need the station up and running now." He nodded without saying another word. He didn't need to, he understood. The station had been built to withstand the chaos of unstable planets, but even the best technology had its limits. They were running out of time, and every second counted. The repairs were critical, and the pressure was mounting with each passing moment. Riley turned back to the console, his hands flying over the controls. He was in his element, focused, determined. But the weight of Alara's presence was hard to ignore. She wasn't just standing behind him, she was waiting for him to fix everything. It wasn't the first time she'd given him such an order, but it felt different this time. She had always been demanding, but today there was something more to it. It was like the weight of the entire station rested on his shoulders. He stole a quick glance at her, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. Ilara was standing tall, her posture as rigid and precise as ever, but there was something in her eyes, something he had never noticed before. There was a sadness there, deep and quiet, hidden behind the fierce resolve that defined her. Riley had always known her to be strong, unshakable even in the face of the most dangerous situations. But now, in the quiet tension of the moment, he saw a crack in that armor. "How long until the repairs are done?" Ilara's voice broke through his thoughts, calm but urgent. "Less than an hour," Riley answered, not looking up from the panel. He didn't need to, the numbers were right there, flashing in front of him. But there was something about her tone, something in the way she asked, that made him pause. She wasn't just asking for an update, she was asking for reassurance. "Make it fast," she said, her tone more firm than before. "We're on a tight deadline." Riley nodded again, his focus returning to the repairs. He could feel the pressure mounting, the clock ticking down with every second. The station's systems were in chaos, flickering in and out of functionality. The gravity stabilizers were malfunctioning, the communications relay was down, and the life support systems were starting to fail. Everything that had once been perfectly operational was now a tangled mess of wires, data feeds, and broken components. The pressure was mounting, but Riley wasn't one to crack under it. Not yet. He glanced at Ilara again. She was still watching him, but her gaze had softened slightly. For a moment, there was no command in her eyes, just something different. Something he couldn't quite understand. She wasn't the Commander Ilara he had always known. For just a fleeting moment, she was something else, something human. Riley felt an odd pull in his chest. It was the same feeling he had when he looked at someone who had been hiding something for too long, someone whose emotions were buried deep beneath layers of duty and responsibility. The beep of the console interrupted his thoughts. The repairs were progressing slowly but steadily. Riley pressed another button, adjusting the power grid. Another error code popped up on the screen. He swore under his breath. "Ilara, I need more time," he called out, frustration creeping into his voice. "I can't give you more time," Ilara replied, her voice hardening again, though there was a slight edge of concern beneath it. "The station is on the brink. We'll have to make do with what we have." Riley didn't argue. He didn't have time for it. Instead, he worked faster, his hands moving with precision. He wasn't just trying to fix the station anymore. Now it felt personal. With every repair, every adjustment, he was racing against time, against the planet, and against Ilara's unspoken expectations. He had always respected her, but now there was something else stirring inside him, something deeper, something that made him want to prove himself to her. To show her that he could fix this, that he could handle the pressure, that he wasn't just a cog in the machine. As the last few moments ticked away, Riley finally made the final adjustment to the main reactor. The console flashed green, signaling that the repairs were complete. The station hummed to life, its systems stabilizing as if it had never been in danger. Riley leaned back in his chair, wiping his brow, exhausted but relieved. Alara stood silent behind him, her face unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Riley couldn't bring himself to turn around, but he could feel her standing there just a few feet away. He could feel the weight of her presence even if she wasn't speaking. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why do you treat me like this?" Alara's voice was softer than he had ever heard it, barely above a whisper. Riley froze. The words struck him like a blow. He had heard her give orders, heard her bark commands at every turn, but never once had she asked him something like this. The question wasn't harsh or demanding. It was quiet, almost fragile, as though she was opening up to him in a way he had never expected. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger, no disappointment, just a quiet curiosity, a longing for something he didn't fully understand. Riley opened his mouth, but no words came. He didn't know how to answer her. He had always treated her with respect, admiration even, but he had never truly understood her. Not like this. He couldn't bring himself to say anything, at least not yet. He had always thought of Alara as the unshakable commander, the one who held the station together with her sheer willpower. But in that moment, he realized that maybe there was more to her than just her role. She wasn't just the commander. She was a person. A person who carried burdens he couldn't even begin to understand. Riley started, but his voice trailed off, unsure of what to say. He had no answers for her, no explanation that would make sense of the years of tension, the years of working under her command. What could he say? That he had always respected her? That he was just doing his job? No, this wasn't about duty anymore. This was something deeper. Alara's gaze softened slightly as she waited for him to speak. She wasn't angry, not at all. It was as if she was simply waiting for something more, a moment of honesty. Riley felt the weight of the silence between them, thick and heavy. For the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about the station or the repairs. This was about them. "I treat you like this because I respect you," Riley finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Because you're the one who keeps this station together. You've always been the one who makes the hard calls, even when they're not easy. And he hesitated. "I guess I never really saw what that cost you. I never saw you as anything more than the commander. But now, I see the person behind the uniform." Alara's expression shifted slightly, the hardness in her face softening, and for the first time, Riley saw her as something other than the unapproachable commander. She was just Alara, a woman who had fought and struggled just like everyone else. The silence stretched between them, but this time it felt different. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding. Neither of them spoke further, but in that silence, something had shifted. Riley had never thought much about Alara's past before. She had always seemed like a force of nature, unyielding, sharp, and focused. But now, as he sat in the dimly lit control room, still processing the repairs he had just completed, the weight of her question hung heavily in the air. He had respected her, sure, but there had always been a distance between them, a boundary he hadn't questioned. Now, for the first time, he found himself wondering about the woman behind the tough exterior. Alara had turned away after their exchange, walking to the far side of the room where the viewport looked out over the dying planet. Her silhouette was framed by the soft glow of the planet's light, casting shadows across her figure. Riley watched her for a moment, unsure whether to approach or give her space. It wasn't like her to be this still, this open. She was always moving, always in control, but now she seemed lost in thought. After a few minutes, Alara spoke, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I didn't expect you to understand," she said without turning around. "I don't expect anyone to, but sometimes I wonder if I even understand myself." Riley hesitated, his thoughts racing. He had spent so many years respecting her leadership, following her orders without question. She had always been the one who held everything together. But now, in this strange moment of vulnerability, he began to realize how little he knew about the person she truly was. "Alara," he began, his voice careful, "I don't know what you've been through, but I can tell it's been more than just the job. It's more than what anyone sees from the outside." She finally turned to face him, her eyes tired but steady. There was something raw in them, something unspoken that Riley could feel even across the distance. She didn't speak at first, but her expression softened just enough for him to catch a glimpse of the person behind the commander. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's been more than just the job, it's been everything." She paused for a moment as if collecting her thoughts. "I wasn't always like this. I didn't always wear this armor." Riley felt a pang of curiosity mixed with empathy. He had seen Alara as this immovable pillar for so long, never questioning where her strength came from. But now he could see the cracks in that foundation. She wasn't invincible. She was human, just like everyone else. And in that moment, Riley realized how little he knew about her, how little anyone knew. "I've had to make hard choices," she continued, her voice low but firm. "Choices that no one else could understand. When you're in a position like mine, you don't get to show weakness. You can't afford to, not when people's lives depend on you." Riley listened carefully, trying to understand the weight she carried. He had always known her to be a woman of immense strength, but he had never understood what that strength had cost her. "Everyone thinks I'm just the commander," she said, her gaze moving away from Riley as if she were speaking more to herself than to him. "They think I'm cold, unfeeling, but they don't know what it's like to be trapped inside a role like this. To be expected to lead with certainty, to make decisions without hesitation, when every part of you is screaming to do something different." Riley's heart tightened as he watched her. He hadn't realized how much Alara had been holding back, how much she had been keeping to herself all these years. The thought that she had been carrying that burden alone made him feel a deep sense of empathy. He wasn't sure what to say, but he felt compelled to speak, to let her know that she wasn't alone. "You don't have to do it alone," he said quietly, his voice steady. "You're not just the commander, you're Alara, a person, and I respect you more than you know." Alara's eyes flickered with something, maybe surprise, maybe a flicker of hope, and for a moment the coldness in her expression softened. She didn't say anything at first, but her shoulders relaxed slightly, and Riley could tell that his words had made an impact. She wasn't used to hearing things like that. She wasn't used to people seeing her as something other than a leader. But in that moment, Riley wasn't just seeing her as the commander. He was seeing her as a person, someone who had endured far more than anyone knew. "I've had to shut a lot of things out," Alara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of restraint. "To survive, to do what's needed, but sometimes I don't know if it's worth it, the sacrifices. The loneliness." She took a deep breath, as if she were trying to hold back a flood of emotions. "I don't know if it's worth it anymore." Riley felt a pang of guilt, a wave of sorrow for her that he hadn't expected. He had always respected her from afar, never truly understanding the toll her role had taken on her. He had never realized how much she had given up, how much of herself she had buried beneath the cold exterior. He had never seen the cost of her strength. "Alara," Riley started, unsure of how to finish his sentence. He didn't have the right words to say, but he knew he had to try. "You don't have to carry this alone. You've got people who care about you, people who see you for more than just your role." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. For a moment, it was as if she were seeing him for the first time. The hardness in her gaze softened, just enough for Riley to see the cracks in her armor. She was still strong, but now there was something else in her eyes, something raw, something human. "I've never known what it's like to be seen that way," Alara said softly, almost to herself. "Not by anyone. It's always been about what I can do, what I can accomplish. People respect me because I get things done, but they don't see me." Riley's heart ached for her. It wasn't just the station she had been carrying all these years. It was the weight of expectations, the isolation of always being the one in charge, the loneliness of never being able to show vulnerability. He had never known that side of her, but now, in this moment, he saw it. "You're not just a commander," Riley said, his voice firm. "You're Alara, and that's who I respect. Not the title, not the role, just you." Alara's expression faltered for a moment, and Riley could see the emotions swirling behind her eyes. For a brief second, it seemed like she might say something else, something deeper, but the moment passed. She looked away, taking a steadying breath, her usual composure returning. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to let go of this role," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I appreciate what you're saying. It means more than you know." Riley nodded, unsure of what else to say. There was a silence between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, a quiet bond that neither of them had expected but both felt deeply. He wasn't sure where this would go or what would happen next, but for the first time he felt like they were seeing each other as equals. Not as commander and subordinate, but as people, each with their own burdens and struggles. The silence stretched for a few more moments before Alara broke it, her voice steady again. "We've still got work to do," she said, her tone returning to its usual professional edge. "But we'll handle it together," Riley nodded. He wasn't sure what had shifted between them, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just an engineer working under her command anymore. He was someone who saw her, understood her, and respected her for everything she was, not just the commander, but the person behind the title. And that, he realized, was the most important thing of all. The following days passed in a haze of constant work. The station was still on high alert, and Riley couldn't afford to lose focus. Repairs had been completed, but there was still much to be done. The system had stabilized, but the planet below was only getting worse. Every day felt like a race against time. Yet despite the urgency of their situation, Riley found himself thinking about Alara more than he should. Her words echoed in his mind. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to let go of this role." She had said them quietly, almost to herself, as though unsure of whether she was even ready to say them out loud. But in that moment, Riley had heard the depth of her struggle. It wasn't just about keeping the station running or overseeing repairs. Alara was carrying a weight far heavier than anything Riley had imagined. She was carrying the weight of leadership, the burden of responsibility, and the cost of always being in control. Despite his focus on the repairs, Riley couldn't stop thinking about her. He had seen her as nothing more than the commander, strong, capable, always in control. But now he knew there was more to her. She was a person with emotions, fears, and vulnerabilities. It was a truth that had always been hidden beneath the surface, and Riley had only begun to realize how much she had been hiding. There was a quiet tension between them now. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different. They no longer spoke in the same way. The harsh orders from Alara had softened, and Riley's responses were more thoughtful, less automatic. It was as if the walls between them had started to crumble, but neither of them knew how to rebuild them, or if they even wanted to. One morning, as Riley walked into the control room, he noticed Alara sitting at her desk, staring out the viewport. She wasn't looking at the planet below, as she usually did, but at the station's systems, her gaze distant. He could tell she was lost in thought. It was a rare sight. Alara was always so focused, so composed, but today she seemed different, like the weight of everything had caught up to her at once. "Commander," Riley spoke carefully, his voice softer than usual. Alara turned to him, her eyes tired but still sharp. She hadn't noticed him standing there at first. "Riley," she said, her voice steady, but there was an underlying fatigue in her tone. "How are the systems?" "They're holding steady for now," Riley replied, his voice professional, but he couldn't help noticing the lines on Alara's face. She looked exhausted, as if the past few days had drained everything from her. "Good," she said, nodding. "I need you to stay on top of any potential issues. I don't want another failure like last time." Riley nodded, but he didn't leave. He could tell something was bothering her, something beyond the usual stress of their situation. He hesitated, unsure of whether he should press further, but in the end he couldn't hold back. "Alara, are you okay?" Her gaze shifted away from him, and for a moment Riley thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her eyes now focused on the data display in front of her. "I've been running this station for so long, making all the decisions, carrying all the responsibility, but sometimes I wonder if I'm losing myself in the process. I've been so focused on keeping everyone safe that I forgot to take care of myself." Riley stood there in silence, his thoughts racing. He had always admired Alara's strength, but he had never fully understood the cost it had come with. He knew that leadership wasn't easy, but hearing her voice, the weight of it made him realize just how much she had been carrying alone. "I didn't know it was like that for you," he said, his voice gentle. Alara let out a small, weary laugh. "No one does," she said, shaking her head. "I never let anyone see it. I couldn't afford to. The moment I show weakness, it all falls apart, but now I'm not sure if I can keep it up much longer." Riley felt a pang of empathy for her. He had always seen her as this unshakable force, but now he realized she was just like everyone else, human, flawed, and vulnerable. He took a step closer, wanting to offer something, anything, to ease the burden she was carrying. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice firm. "You have us, you have me." Alara looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. She didn't respond right away, and for a long time it felt like the silence between them stretched on endlessly. Riley wasn't sure if his words had made any difference. He had always respected her strength, but now he saw it wasn't the same kind of strength he had imagined. It wasn't the unbreakable kind. It was the kind of strength that carried pain, that carried burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. Finally, Alara spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know what I would do without you, Riley. I've been so focused on keeping everyone else together that I forgot I might need someone too." Riley smiled, a small, genuine smile. "You don't have to carry it all alone. We're a team." Alara nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "A team," she repeated, almost as if the word held a deeper meaning than it ever had before. She looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, and for the first time, Riley saw a flicker of something he hadn't seen before: vulnerability. "I've been so afraid of letting go," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that if I let go, everything will fall apart, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's okay to rely on others, to let them help." Riley didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure how much help he could really offer, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let her go through this alone, not anymore. "We've all got your back," he said quietly. "I've got your back." Alara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, Riley thought she might say something more, something deeper, but instead she nodded, her expression hardening once again. The commander was back, the one who made the hard decisions and kept everything running smoothly. But there was a new softness in her, something Riley hadn't noticed before. "Thank you, Riley," Alara said, her voice firm but sincere. "I needed to hear that." He gave her a nod and stepped back, allowing her space to return to her work. But this time he didn't feel the same distance between them. He wasn't just an engineer anymore. He wasn't just the one who fixed things. He was someone she could rely on, someone who understood, even if only a little, what she was going through. As Riley turned to leave the control room, he felt a shift in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. It wasn't just the planet below them that was unstable anymore. It was the fragile balance they had built in their relationship, the understanding that had formed between them. It was a new dynamic, one that neither of them had expected, but one that Riley knew would make them stronger in the end. The repairs were far from over. The planet still teetered on the edge of destruction. The station's future was uncertain. But for the first time, Riley felt like they could face whatever came next together. They were no longer just commander and subordinate. They were a team. The days seemed to stretch on forever. The tension between them had eased, but the pressure of their situation never let up. The station was still in danger, and the planet beneath them was continuing its inevitable decline. Every day, there was a new system failure to address, a new issue to fix, and the clock was always ticking. But through it all, Riley noticed something different in Alara. She had become quieter, less commanding, more human. It wasn't that she wasn't still the commander. She still carried the weight of leadership, still made the difficult decisions that no one else could make. But Riley had seen the cracks in her armor, and it made him realize just how much she had been hiding behind that tough exterior all this time. It wasn't just the job that had changed her. It was everything she had endured. Riley had been working with her side by side for days, handling the technical side of things while Alara oversaw everything, making sure the station stayed afloat. They hadn't talked much outside of work, but there was a mutual understanding between them. They were both carrying their own burdens, but they were no longer carrying them alone. At least not completely. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Riley found himself standing by the viewport, looking out at the dying planet. He couldn't help but feel a strange connection to it. The planet was being torn apart, its core unstable, and yet there was still life on it. A desperate, fighting kind of life, much like the station they were on, much like Alara. He wondered how long they could keep this up, how long they could keep fighting before everything came crashing down. "Alara," Riley said, turning to face her. She had been sitting at the command desk, reviewing data, but she looked up at him as he spoke. Yes, her voice was calm, as it always was, but Riley could see the tiredness in her eyes. She wasn't hiding it anymore. "Are we really going to make it?" he asked. The question had been on his mind for days, but he hadn't dared to ask it before. He didn't want to show doubt, didn't want to seem like he was questioning their ability to succeed. But now, in the quiet of the room, with the hum of the station as their only company, it felt like the right time to ask. Alara didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Riley couldn't tell if she was surprised by the question or if she had been expecting it. Finally, she sighed, sitting back in her chair. "I don't know, Riley," she admitted, her voice soft. "I don't know if we will. Every time I think we've got it under control, something new comes up. And I've been through so many close calls that it's hard to believe we'll make it through this one." She paused, looking away for a moment. "But we keep going anyway. We don't have a choice." "Not when there are lives at stake," Riley nodded. He understood that feeling all too well. It was the same reason he kept working, even when he was exhausted. They didn't have the luxury of giving up, not when so many people depended on them. "We're still fighting," Riley said, his voice firm. "We'll keep fighting until the very end." Alara gave him a small, tired smile. "You're right," she said, her tone softer now. "We'll keep fighting." They both stood in silence for a moment, watching the planet below. It felt like a moment of quiet understanding between them, an unspoken bond that had formed over the past few days. They were no longer just commander and engineer. They were two people, both trying to survive in the face of something far bigger than themselves. But as the moment passed, Alara's expression shifted. Her gaze hardened once again, and Riley could see the familiar resolve in her eyes. "We can't afford to wait around," she said, standing up and walking over to the control panel. "There's still a lot of work to do." "The repairs won't finish themselves." Riley nodded, following her to the panel. "What's the next step?" he asked, eager to get back to work. "Check the life support systems," she said. "We need to make sure that's stable before we move on to anything else. If we lose power in the middle of all this, we're done." Riley moved to the nearby console, bringing up the necessary data. As he did, he couldn't help but notice the way Alara worked. She was methodical, precise, and focused. She had always been that way, but now it felt different. There was a certain vulnerability to her, a quiet sadness that lingered just beneath the surface. She didn't talk about it, but Riley could see it. He could feel it, too. They spent the next few hours working together, fixing system after system, checking and rechecking everything to ensure the station would stay functional. It was tedious, exhausting work, but they were making progress. Slowly but surely, they were getting the station back on track. Around midnight, as they took a brief break, Alara finally spoke again. "Riley, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, wiping his brow. "What's on your mind?" Alara hesitated for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the console. "I've been thinking about something, about how this all started, the station, the mission, everything." Riley glanced over at her, sensing that this wasn't just about the repairs anymore. There was something deeper on her mind. "I wasn't always like this," Alara continued, her voice distant. "I didn't always feel like I had to be the one in control, the one everyone looked to, but somewhere along the way I became that person. And now I don't know how to let go of it." Riley felt a pang of sympathy for her. He knew that being in charge came with its own set of burdens, but he had never truly understood the weight of it until now. Alara had spent so many years being the one everyone relied on, the one everyone turned to for answers. And now she was admitting that it was wearing her down. "You don't have to do it alone," Riley said softly, meeting her gaze. "I'm here, we're all here." Alara gave him a small, grateful smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "I know," she said, "but sometimes it feels like no one can understand what it's like, to always be the one holding everything together." Riley took a deep breath. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. "We all have our roles to play and we all have our burdens, but we don't have to carry them by ourselves. We've got each other." For a moment, Alara didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. But then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you, Riley," she said quietly. "I needed to hear that." They stood there for a moment longer, the hum of the station filling the silence between them. Riley could feel the weight of their words, the unspoken connection that had formed between them over the past few days. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning to understand each other in a way they never had before. As they turned back to the control panel, ready to dive back into the work ahead, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. It wasn't just the repairs that were bringing them closer. It was the understanding, the quiet support that had formed in the space between their words. They still had a long way to go. The station wasn't safe yet, and the planet's instability was growing worse with each passing hour. But Riley felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were in this together, not just as commander and engineer, but as two people facing the same fight. And that made all the difference. The days had blurred together into one long stretch of tension and hard work. Riley and Alara had settled into a routine, one that was relentless but necessary. The station's systems were holding steady for now, but everyone knew that stability was fleeting. The planet's core was still unstable, and every repair they made was just a temporary fix. But with each passing hour, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. They were no longer just colleagues working toward a common goal. They had become something more, something deeper. Alara's presence had softened, not in the way most people might think. She was still the commander, still the one who made the difficult decisions, but Riley saw a new side of her now. She wasn't the cold, distant leader he had once known. There was something more human about her, something raw and vulnerable. She had begun to let him see that side of herself, the side that was afraid, unsure, and tired. She had always carried the weight of the station alone, but now Riley could feel the burden she had been hiding. They had been working side by side for hours, fixing systems, running diagnostics, and checking the station's power grid. The work was grueling, but it kept their minds occupied. It kept them from dwelling on the inevitable. There was always a new problem to solve, a new crisis to avert. The station needed them, and they couldn't afford to slow down. Riley glanced at Alara as she sat at the command desk, her fingers flying over the console. She looked more exhausted than ever, her eyes bloodshot and tired, but she didn't stop. She never stopped. Riley had learned that much about her. She was relentless in her drive to protect the station and everyone aboard it. But he also knew that relentless drive came at a cost. He saw it in the way her shoulders slumped slightly when she thought no one was watching. He heard it in her voice when she thought she had failed. But Riley never said anything about it. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. After another long stretch of repairs, Alara stood up from her chair, stretching her arms above her head. The quiet sound of her joints cracking broke the silence, and Riley couldn't help but chuckle softly. She turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "You find that funny?" she asked, her voice slightly amused but tired. "Just thinking you could use a break," Riley replied, his voice light but genuine. "You've been working non-stop. You need to rest." "I don't have time for rest," Alara said, shaking her head. "Not until we're sure the station is safe." Riley could tell she was still pushing herself too hard, but he also knew she wouldn't listen to anything he said. Alara was used to bearing the weight of everything herself. She always had been. But it wasn't healthy, and Riley could see it was taking a toll on her. It was taking a toll on both of them. "Look," he said, turning his attention to the data screen in front of him, "I'm going to finish this last diagnostic. You should get some rest. You'll be no good to anyone if you burn out." Alara didn't respond right away. She stood there for a moment, her eyes flicking over to him. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but stopped herself. Finally, she sighed, slumping into the chair next to him. "You're right," she admitted, her voice low. I don't know how to stop. I've been doing this for so long, it's all I know." Riley looked at her, his expression softening. He understood. She had spent so many years being the one in charge, the one everyone relied on. It was hard to let go of that, even for a moment, but they both knew it wasn't sustainable. She couldn't keep carrying the weight of everything on her own. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," Riley said gently. "We're all in this together. You don't have to carry the burden by yourself." Alara turned to him, her eyes meeting his for a long moment. She didn't say anything at first, but Riley could see the emotion in her eyes. There was a vulnerability there, one that had been buried for so long. It wasn't something she showed often, but when she did, it was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've been so focused on the station, on keeping everyone safe, I've forgotten that I don't have to do it all alone. I've forgotten what it feels like to rely on someone else." Riley didn't know how to respond to that. He had never imagined that the commander, the woman who had always seemed so unbreakable, would be the one to admit that. But there it was, out in the open. Alara wasn't just a leader. She was a person just like everyone else, with doubts, fears, and a need for connection. It made her stronger in a way because it made her real. He nodded slowly. "I'm here for you, Alara, whenever you need me." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Riley." They sat in silence for a few moments, the hum of the station and the distant sounds of repairs filling the space between them. It was a comfortable silence, one that didn't feel heavy. It felt like an understanding had passed between them, a shared recognition that they were no longer just two people working on the same project. They were partners in this fight, both trying to hold on to something in the face of a collapsing world. After a moment, Alara stood up again, more slowly this time, and stretched her back. "All right, I'll take a break," she said, glancing at Riley. "But only for a little while. We've still got a long way to go." "Of course," Riley agreed, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We've got this." Alara nodded, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the station systems one last time before heading toward the small bunk area where she could rest. Riley turned back to the console, his mind still working through the data, but there was a new sense of determination in him. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting together. Later that evening, when the lights of the station dimmed slightly to signal a shift change, Riley found himself standing in front of the viewport again. The planet was still there, teetering on the edge of destruction. But for some reason, it didn't feel as hopeless as it had before. Maybe it was because Alara had opened up, or maybe it was because he knew they were no longer alone in this fight. Whatever the reason, there was a sense of purpose now, a sense of unity. Alara joined him shortly, looking more rested than she had all day. She wasn't fully relaxed, but she had taken the time she needed, and it showed. Her expression was more composed, more focused. She still had the weight of the world on her shoulders, but at least now she didn't have to bear it alone. "I've got the team working on the next set of repairs," she said, her voice steady again. "We're making progress. It's slow, but we're getting there." Riley nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll keep going until the end, together." Alara gave him a small smile, and for the first time in days, Riley saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Hope. Maybe it was fleeting, but it was there, and it was enough. They stood there together, looking out at the planet and the station, both of them knowing that they had a long road ahead. But they also knew that they could face whatever came next. They had each other. They were a team, and that was something worth fighting for. And that made all the difference.